The lights above the stage hummed, casting a sharp white glow on the polished floor and the two figures at the center of the unfolding storm. This wasn't just a panel, it was a cultural collision. Denzel Washington stood, poised and unshaken, with the weight of lived experience behind his steady eyes. Across from him, Barron Trump, now stepping into public view in his early 20s, carried the unmistakable presence of his father's legacy. The room buzzed with anticipation, but what came next no one was ready for. "You know," Denzel began, voice low but commanding, "they told me this would be a discussion on policy. But how do you talk policy with someone who's never had to live under it?" Barron straightened, clearly expecting scrutiny but not ready for what was being launched. "Mr. Washington, I came here to engage in good faith. Not to be personally attacked." Denzel smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who's been through fires others only read about. "See, that's the problem. You think honesty is an attack. You think discomfort is disrespect. Let me ask you something, Barron. Have you ever had to choose between paying a bill and feeding your family? Ever sat in a classroom where the roof leaked, where textbooks were older than your teacher?" The audience froze. Barron blinked, clearly caught off guard. "With respect, that's not relevant to this conversation." "It's the only thing that's relevant," Denzel replied. "Because while you stand there quoting GDP stats and immigration figures, you forget the faces behind those numbers. The mothers. The sons. The people whose voices don't carry the weight of a last name like yours." Barron held his ground. "I don't believe I should be judged for the family I was born into." Denzel nodded. "You shouldn't. But you also don't get to use that name as armor and expect silence from the rest of us. Your father may have handed you the mic, but what you say into it matters now." The moderator shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension escalate. But Denzel wasn't done. "You talk about law and order, but I watched your name lit up on hotels while communities were crumbling 2 blocks away. Don't talk to me about law when justice only ever shows up wearing a price tag. Don't talk to me about truth when your version comes wrapped in inheritance and security detail." The crowd stirred. Some murmured in agreement. Others watched with nervous awe. "The name Trump won't shield you from truth," Denzel said finally, voice calm, clear, and inarguable. "Because the truth lives with those who had nothing to inherit but the struggle." And in that moment, the weight of history tilted. The air felt thicker now. Every breath drawn in the studio came slower, deeper, as if everyone was subconsciously bracing for what might come next. Barron, to his credit, didn't back down. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, and replied with forced steadiness, "Mr. Washington, I don't dismiss your experience, but I do reject this narrative that anyone with my last name must be the villain in your story." Denzel's eyes didn't flinch. "It's not about villains and heroes, Barron. That's what makes it more dangerous. It's about silence dressed as neutrality. It's about power pretending it never held the pen while entire chapters of history were written in someone else's blood." Barron paused. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. His usual talking points, polished and practiced, suddenly felt too thin, too fragile to withstand the pressure of real experience pressing down on him. "You want to talk policy? Let's talk school funding," Denzel continued. "Let's talk about black neighborhoods treated like war zones while tax breaks are handed to billionaire developers. You say you're here in good faith? Then tell me what you've done to earn it." The audience burst into applause, not the polite kind, but the thunderous, rising kind that shakes the walls. Barron's face tightened. "I don't need to prove myself to you," he said, the edge in his voice sharper now. "My work speaks for itself." Denzel raised an eyebrow. "Work? Barron, you gave a speech at a think tank your father's allies built. You interned at firms that your name opened the door to. Don't confuse access with effort." Even the moderator, clearly trying to remain neutral, had to glance down awkwardly. Barron shifted in his seat. You think you're challenging me, Denzel added, stepping forward. But you're challenging every man who ever fought for a seat at the table you were born sitting at. And we don't forget that. For the first time, Barron looked down. The moment held, stretching like a tightrope between generations. Denzel didn't gloat. He simply stood there, firm as bedrock. You see, Barron, he said, voice steady, people like me, we weren't groomed to speak. We had to earn every breath we were allowed to take in public. You walk onto a stage and people listen because of your last name. I had to fight for a stage in the first place. Barron clenched his jaw. The silence from him was telling. The audience, now silent themselves, watched with unblinking attention. Let me tell you something else, Denzel continued. When we speak of equity, we're not asking for handouts. We're asking you to stop building systems that require us to bleed before we're even allowed to ask questions. Barron finally spoke, trying to regain control. So what would you have me do? Disown my name? Pretend like I wasn't born into it? Denzel shook his head. No, Barron. I'm asking you to stop using it like a badge of truth. I'm asking you to understand that truth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from confrontation. And you've spent your life shielded from both. Barron looked genuinely taken aback. For the first time, his eyes searched the audience's, as if looking for a way out, a nod of support, a lifeline. But all he found was the echo of Denzel's words, hanging in the air like judgment. The moderator stepped in hesitantly. Gentlemen, perhaps we could pivot to solutions? But neither man moved. The studio knew this wasn't about pivoting. This was about finally facing the mirror. And Denzel wasn't finished. Denzel took a slow step forward, never breaking eye contact. His voice dropped just enough to make everyone in the room lean in. You want solutions, Barron? Here's one. Start by listening. Not just hearing words you can rebut, but actually listening to the weight of stories you'll never have to carry. Barron tried to compose himself. I am listening. But every time I speak, you dismiss me as if my perspective is invalid because of my last name. Denzel didn't flinch. It's not your name that disqualifies you, it's the fact that you use it as insulation. You step into this arena acting like you're bringing balance, but you forget that the scale was tipped in your favor before you even learned to talk. The audience hummed in agreement. Barron's face hardened, but Denzel continued, you see, I grew up with boys who didn't make it past 18. Not because they were weak, but because the system decided they weren't worth the effort. And now I sit here, and I'm told to debate both sides like we're playing fair. He gestured to the audience. There are people watching this who work 2 jobs and still can't afford healthcare. Kids who ride 2 buses just to get to a crumbling school. And you want to talk about both sides? You can't mediate a fire when you've never felt the burn. Barron opened his mouth, but Denzel raised a hand, not to silence him, but to hold the moment. You don't get to rebrand reality, Barron. Not with a suit, not with PR spin, not even with the Trump name. Truth doesn't bend for optics. The moderator tried to interject again, but was waved off by audience applause. Denzel turned back to Barron. This isn't just a debate for me. This is my life. My community. My skin in the game, literally. So if you want to be taken seriously, drop the script. Show us who you really are when there's no safety net. Barron's posture shifted. For the first time, he looked less like a spokesperson and more like a young man standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. Denzel stepped back, his voice echoing, the truth doesn't need a brand, Barron. It needs courage. Do you have any? Barron's face was tight now, no longer smug, no longer defensive. Just uncertain. Like he had walked onto that stage thinking it would be a conversation, and instead found himself standing at the crossroads of identity and legacy. His voice, when it came, was lower. I never asked for the name, he said. I didn't choose it. I didn't choose the spotlight. Denzel nodded, folding his arms calmly. You didn't choose it, but you benefit from it. And that's the part you can't ignore. You walk into rooms already forgiven. Already trusted. Already taken seriously. People like me? We have to prove we belong before we even open our mouths. The silence in the studio wasn't awkward, it was electric. Even those who had come unsure of Denzel's presence were now captivated. His calm, his command, it wasn't anger, it was clarity sharpened by 1,000 quiet battles. You see, Denzel continued, I've seen young men with names no one bothered to learn get followed through stores. I've watched fathers work 3 jobs and still be treated like thieves. I've seen a system so rigged it breaks people before it educates them. And every time someone like me tries to speak up, there's always someone like you saying, let's be civil. Barron's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. And don't think this is personal, Denzel added. It's historical. You are a symbol, not the source. But symbols carry weight. And right now, the weight of yours is crushing people. He took a breath. So I'm not here to attack you, Barron. I'm here to ask you, what are you going to do with the platform you didn't earn, but now hold? Barron looked away for a second, struggling to gather words. Maybe I start by not pretending I have all the answers. Denzel gave a slight nod, acknowledging the honesty without letting go of the fire. Good start. But don't stop there. Listening is step 1. Step 2 is using that name to break something open, not protect what's broken. And just like that, the tone shifted, not into peace, but possibility. The kind that only comes when truth has scorched through the room and cleared the air. The moderator, clearly unsure of whether to step in or stay quiet, finally leaned forward. Gentlemen, I think it's fair to ask, what's the path forward? Where do we go from here? But all eyes stayed fixed on Denzel. Not because Barron hadn't spoken, but because for the first time, everyone could feel he was the one being educated now. Denzel didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, addressing not just Barron, but the crowd and the cameras. We go forward by telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. He looked directly at Barron again. You said earlier you didn't choose the name. Fine. But now that you wear it, you carry what comes with it. You want to separate yourself from the legacy? Then start by calling it out. Not just behind closed doors, not just in private statements, but publicly. Loudly. Barron's lips pressed into a thin line. You want me to attack my own father on national television? Denzel shook his head. No. I want you to choose truth over comfort. That's what leadership is. That's what manhood is. If you can't do that, then all you're doing is extending the lie with a cleaner haircut. A few gasps rippled through the audience. The line had bite, but it landed because it was real. Denzel didn't speak in riddles. He cut through the noise. You say you respect different perspectives, he continued. But respect without action is just decoration. And the truth is, your last name has been used to divide. To silence. To mock suffering. If that bothers you, then don't just say so. Do something about it. Barron's voice rose now, trying to match the weight of the moment. I am trying to do something. I'm here, aren't I? Denzel stepped closer. Being here isn't enough. It never was. You show up, you listen, then you walk away unchanged. That's not progress. That's performance. The tension in the room returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't just conflict, it was transformation. The crowd wasn't just watching a debate. They were watching Barron Trump be held accountable in real time by a man who had earned every ounce of the authority he carried. Barron took a shallow breath, the spotlight suddenly feeling hotter, heavier. You act like I've never questioned things, he said, his voice edged with frustration. Like I've never looked around and felt the weight of the name I carry. But I can't undo the world I was born into, Denzel. Denzel didn't blink. No one's asking you to undo it. I'm asking you to stop hiding behind it. He leaned forward slightly, voice calm but sharp as glass. You walk into every room with a cushion beneath your feet. People call you impressive before you've even proven anything. Meanwhile, there are kids out there who can code in 3 languages, lead protests, feed their families, and they're still called thugs or threats. You think that's just coincidence? Barron looked away for a second. The camera caught it, and so did the audience. It was a flicker of recognition, maybe even shame. Denzel continued, his tone tightening. You know what the real privilege is? It's never having to explain yourself. Never having to prove your pain is real. You were handed a microphone, Barron. And all I'm saying is, use it for more than defending the legacy. Use it to change the direction of it. Barron turned back, frustration rising. You act like I don't care. Like I haven't tried to speak up. But every time I do, I get told it's not enough. That it's too polished, too safe. Maybe that's just who I am. Denzel paused. Then he smiled, but not out of satisfaction. It was the kind of smile that came from hearing the truth for the first time, even if it was buried in protest. Maybe it is, he said. But safe never changed a damn thing. Every real shift in this country came from people who weren't afraid to make someone uncomfortable. And if you're more worried about how you're seen than what's right, then step off the stage and make room for someone who isn't. The crowd stirred again. This wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Denzel wasn't trying to humiliate Barron. He was trying to break through the layers of politeness and privilege to reach something honest. Barron's voice lowered. You really think I can change anything? Denzel leaned in. If you're willing to bleed for the truth like others have bled just to speak it, then maybe. The air in the studio thickened, charged not with hostility, but with something rarer, raw honesty. For once, the cameras weren't feeding a spectacle, they were capturing a reckoning. Barron Trump stood not as a symbol of inherited power but as a man suddenly uncertain of what that power meant. Denzel stepped back, allowing the silence to breathe. Then, in that space, he said, You know, Barron, there was a time when I thought silence was survival. That if you stayed quiet, kept your head down, maybe you'd be spared. But I learned that silence doesn't protect you, it buries you. Barron swallowed hard. So what do you want from me? Denzel raised his hand slowly, not in accusation, but in instruction. I want you to use your name like a crowbar, not a shield. Pry open conversations that your father locked shut. Stand next to the people your family stepped over. And when they ask why, you say, because the truth matters more than legacy. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper. Agreement. Recognition. Even a few tears. Barron, visibly moved but still guarded, tried to push back. That's a lot to put on one person. And yet, Denzel said, voice unwavering, we've put more on people with nothing. Mothers raising sons under police lights. Teachers who buy their own supplies. Veterans who come home to indifference. You think this is pressure? This is the price of the microphone you didn't earn but were handed. The moderator, for once, stayed silent. No need to steer this. The story was writing itself. Denzel stepped forward again. Look, I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. But I won't let you skate by on performative humility. If you're gonna stand in front of the world and talk about change, then you'd better be ready to lose something for it. Reputation. Favor. Comfort. Barron lowered his gaze. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Denzel nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said all night. The silence following Denzel's words felt like a full sentence in itself, heavy, deliberate, and utterly unignorable. Barron stood motionless, the corners of his mouth twitching ever so slightly as if wrestling with the gravity of his own admission. He didn't try to rebut. He didn't attempt a polished comeback. For the first time, he looked human. Denzel didn't press. He let the weight of honesty linger. "It's not about being ready," he said finally. "It's about deciding that truth matters more than comfort. Nobody ever wakes up ready to challenge the machine, especially when it's the one that raised you." The audience hung on every word, their silence more telling than any cheer. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was transformation on display. "You know what I had to be ready for?" Denzel continued, his voice deepening. "To be called angry for demanding fairness. To be labeled arrogant for walking with pride. To be dismissed as emotional when I refused to accept injustice with a smile. You're asked to be brave by simply not lying." Barron's jaw flexed. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "So what would you do if you were me?" Denzel tilted his head. "I'd use the name like a scalpel, not a mask. I'd step into rooms my father never dared enter. I'd apologize for silence. I'd speak to the pain my family never had to feel, and I'd do it without asking for praise." The camera zoomed in as Barron's eyes reddened, blinking hard. Not because he was defeated, but because something inside him was finally breaking loose. The script. The training. The performative armor. All of it thinning under the pressure of truth. Denzel finished with a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. "The truth will cost you. But the lie already owns you. The question is, what are you going to pay for?" The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The stillness was louder than any ovation. The moderator slowly leaned toward the mic, her voice careful, quiet. "We're nearing the end of the broadcast. Final thoughts?" But no one moved. All eyes stayed on Barron, who stood there with the kind of stillness that only came when everything rehearsed had finally crumbled. His voice, when it returned, was stripped of polish. "I don't know if I deserve this platform." Denzel didn't smirk. Didn't nod. He just looked at the young man with the kind of clarity born not from superiority, but from survival. "No one deserves it," he said softly. "That's why it matters how you use it." Barron glanced at the audience, then back at Denzel. "I used to think speaking carefully was the same as speaking responsibly. Now I see it's not. Careful is safe," Denzel replied. "And safe is what built this mess." For the first time, Barron turned to face the crowd, no notes in hand, no lines in mind. "I know my name opens doors. And I know it closes others for people who don't look like me. I didn't ask for that power, but I have it. And I'm going to start using it to amplify, not erase." The words weren't revolutionary, but the moment was. He wasn't redeemed, not suddenly. But he was stripped bare. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. Denzel stepped forward, not as a man victorious, but as one who had seen this story before, and refused to let it end the same way. He turned to the moderator. "We don't need perfect answers. We need public courage. And if tonight taught us anything, it's that there's no shortcut through truth. You either face it, or you become what you fear." The lights dimmed slightly as the broadcast wrapped. The studio didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Because every viewer, every skeptic, every supporter watching at home had seen something rare, a Trump being told the truth, and actually listening. And at the center of it all stood Denzel, not as a guest, not as an actor, but as a voice that cut through the noise and spoke directly to the nation's soul. Sometimes the loudest room is the one where truth finally echoes. Tonight wasn't about winning a debate, it was about daring to break the script. Denzel didn't just challenge a name. He challenged the comfort behind it. And Barron? For once, he listened. Maybe that's where change begins. If this moved you, don't just watch, share it. Because voices like this deserve more than silence.